George Washington, the man behind the legend. Introduction. George Washington is remembered as the first President of the United States, the victorious general of the American Revolution, and the unifying leader who shaped the nation. However, beyond his public persona, he was a man of deep family connections, personal struggles, and unwavering duty. His journey from a young boy on a Virginia plantation to the father of his country was shaped by his family, mentors, and experiences. This story explores the personal side of Washington, focusing on his family, upbringing, relationships, and the lasting impact of his legacy. Chapter 1. A Humble Beginning. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia, on a modest plantation along Pope's Creek. His father, Augustine Washington, was a wealthy planter and iron manufacturer, while his mother, Mary Ball Washington, was a strong-willed and devout woman. Augustine Washington had been married once before, and George had three half-siblings, Lawrence, Augustine Jr., and Jane, from his father's first marriage to Jane Butler. After Jane's death, Augustine married Mary Ball in 1731, and together they had 6 children, with George being the eldest of this second family. Young George grew up in a world of tobacco plantations, hard work, and high expectations. However, his childhood was disrupted when his father passed away in 1743, when George was only 11 years old. The loss of his father meant George's formal education was cut short, and he never attended college. Instead, he learned from experience, books, and mentors, like his older half-brother, Lawrence Washington. Chapter 2. The Influence of Lawrence Washington. After their father's death, George's older half-brother Lawrence took him under his wing. Lawrence had served in the British military and had married into the influential Fairfax family. He owned the grand Mount Vernon estate, which left a lasting impression on young George. Lawrence saw great potential in George and introduced him to powerful connections, including Lord Fairfax, one of the most influential men in Virginia. Under Lawrence's guidance, George began training as a land surveyor, a profession that allowed him to explore the vast American frontier and gain valuable experience in leadership and self-reliance. However, tragedy struck again when Lawrence died in 1752 from tuberculosis. Lawrence had been more than a brother; he was a mentor and father figure to George. Upon his death, George eventually inherited Mount Vernon, setting the stage for his future as a wealthy planter and leader. Chapter 3. Love and Marriage. Despite his rising status, George Washington faced challenges in love. As a young man, he had been deeply infatuated with Sally Fairfax, the wife of his friend George William Fairfax. However, Sally was already married, and their relationship remained one of unspoken affection. In 1759, Washington married Martha Dandridge Custis, a wealthy widow with 2 children, John Jackie Custis and Martha Patsy Custis. The marriage provided George with financial security and social standing, as Martha was one of the wealthiest women in Virginia. Although George and Martha never had biological children, he raised Jackie and Patsy as his own. Tragically, Patsy suffered from epilepsy and died as a teenager, an event that deeply saddened Washington. Jackie, on the other hand, grew into a young man with little interest in responsibility. He eventually joined the Revolutionary War, but died of disease during the campaign, another heartbreaking loss for the Washington family. Despite these tragedies, George and Martha remained devoted to each other. Their marriage was built on mutual respect and companionship, and Martha supported her husband throughout his military and political career. Chapter 4. The American Revolution and Family Sacrifices. As tensions grew between the American colonies and Britain, Washington was drawn into the revolutionary cause. In 1775, he was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, a position that required immense personal sacrifice. During the war, Washington spent 8 long years away from home, rarely seeing Martha. However, she often traveled to join him in military camps, providing comfort and moral support. The war also tested Washington's extended family. His stepson, Jackie, insisted on joining the military despite his lack of experience. Sadly, Jackie contracted camp fever, likely typhus or dysentery, and died in 1781, leaving behind a grieving mother and stepfather. Washington took responsibility for Jackie's widow and children, ensuring their well-being. Chapter 5. Returning home and becoming president. After the war ended in 1783, Washington resigned his commission and returned to Mount Vernon, hoping to live a quiet life as a planter. However, fate had other plans. By 1787, the young nation was struggling under the weak Articles of Confederation. Washington was reluctantly drawn back into public service and presided over the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. His leadership helped shape the U.S. Constitution, and in 1789, he was unanimously elected as the first President of the United States. Despite his initial reluctance, Washington took office and established the foundation of the U.S. government. He set many precedents, including the tradition of serving only 2 terms, which became an unofficial rule until the 22nd Amendment made it law in 1951. Chapter 6. The Personal Side of the Presidency. Life in the presidential spotlight was difficult for Washington. He longed for the peace of Mount Vernon but felt duty-bound to serve his country. Martha Washington, too, found life in the Capitol challenging. She preferred the quiet plantation life but supported her husband's presidency. She hosted many social events, helping shape the role of the First Lady. Despite his status, Washington faced personal hardships. His mother, Mary Ball Washington, constantly sought financial support and often complained about his lack of attention. When she passed away in 1789, Washington was deeply saddened, but had little time to grieve due to his presidential duties. Chapter 7. The Final Years and Legacy. After completing 2 terms as president, Washington retired in 1797 to Mount Vernon, hoping to enjoy his remaining years. However, his health began to decline. On December 14, 1799, after riding in cold, wet weather, Washington developed a severe throat infection. His doctors attempted several treatments, including bloodletting, but their efforts only worsened his condition. That evening, George Washington passed away at the age of 67, surrounded by his loved ones. His last words, spoken with dignity and calmness, were, "'Tis well." Washington was buried at Mount Vernon, where his tomb remains a national landmark. His legacy lived on, inspiring generations of leaders. Conclusion: the father of a nation. George Washington's life was shaped by family, sacrifice, and duty. From his early years as a young boy in Virginia to becoming the leader of a new nation, his journey was filled with personal losses and triumphs. Despite losing his father at a young age, he found guidance in his brother Lawrence. Though he never had biological children, he raised his stepchildren as his own. His marriage to Martha was built on mutual respect, and together they endured war, political challenges, and personal tragedies. Washington's greatest legacy was not just in his leadership, but in his unwavering dedication to the principles of democracy and unity. He stepped away from power when he could have ruled for life, setting an example for future leaders. His influence endures, not only in monuments and currency, but in the very ideals that the United States was built upon. George Washington was not just the first president. He was the heart and soul of a new nation,